And a very good evening, everybody, and a very warm welcome to our Lyceum evening, coming to you from the Paul Christian Spiritualist Church. And we're down on the south coast of the UK. We are travelling right the way up country tonight to wonderful, beautiful Edinburgh. And we have a wonderful and beautiful guest with us tonight, the lovely Ewan Irvine. Ewan, good evening, sir.
Good evening. When he said beautiful, I was about to turn round. I thought there must be someone else there. But yeah, it's a very cold Edinburgh at the moment.
Yes.
We're settling in.
Yes, same down here. I had a bit of a shock today because one of my radiators was warm, and I'm like, why is that warm? And of course, the temperature's dropped. So the thermostat's done its job, and it's actually quite fitting for tonight because Ewan, among his many talents, now I have had the great pleasure of working alongside Ewan both on the platform physically and also virtually for the Arthur Conan Doyle Centre. If that's not enough, Ewan is an award holder for speaking, if I am correct there.
Yes, for not stopping speaking, I think.
Wonderful person, and he is also an author. Now, when Ewan was with us last year, he very kindly gifted me his book. And forgive me, I'm just going to have to I'm not doing a hard sell, but the only picture I can find to share on this system is from the Amazon page. And it's Witches, Spirits and Spells of Scotland. Now, this is one of those wonderful, wonderful books. And as we're coming into this time of year where the nights are drawing in and the weather's a bit bleak and there's never anything on the telly, this is one of these wonderful books that you can pick up because it's divided up into all these different chapters with all these amazing vignettes of different folklore and tales from the other side of the border. How did you come about compiling that, Ewan?
I think always being interested in the paranormal from when I was knee-high to a grasshopper, and my parents used to visit. You know, you go around the stately homes and you get a tour, and my first words always to the guide were, "Where's the ghost? Where's the haunted room?" And that seems to be where it all came about here. But over time, I found that the stories that I researched and looked at were ones that, all bar one that fascinates me, all have the grains of truth in them. They have the facts in them. And they may have been embellished over the years in many places, but when you actually take them back to their core and to their root, the facts are there. And I guess that's the bits that kind of thrill me, so to speak.
Wonderful, wonderful. And going, hello, Benny.
My dog bark.
Yeah. Somebody at the door.
Probably, I'm just ignoring it.
Wonderful, wonderful stories in that book, and it is so wonderful. The way it's set out, it's ideal just to pick up and peruse and go through a few pages and just go into that. But really interesting when we look at these tales through our spiritualist eyes and mindset, we can actually see things going on there and just think that's really interesting. Because it's chapter 2, excuse me, murdering the Scottish language. The Brian Seer.
The Bran and Seer, yes.
That was close.
And the history of Second Sight, he will quieten down in a minute or two, but you know that the Second Sight considered to be almost the sights here. And I guess it was seen going back in history as a kind of sign of witchcraft in many ways. But then what's fascinating is when we look back and we look at those accused of witchcraft, were actually just normal people practicing their healing gifts.
Yeah.
but it was thought where magic and spells could be used to heal, which was the great thing about it. Very often it was thought that the magic and the spells could also cause harm. So that very much brought people's downfall. The Bran Seer is a little bit different, but the great thing was how he predicted the Battle of Culloden, for instance. And I have to refer to the book here because I never quite remember the quotation, but of course, Battle of Culloden was in 1746, but many years before, his quotation was, "O Dramosi, thy bleak moor shall ere many generations have passed away be stained with the best blood of the Highlands. Glad am I that I will not see the day, for it will be a fearful period. Heads will be lopped off by the score, and no mercy shall be shown or quarter given on either side." So he was said to predict the Battle of Culloden many years before. Fascinating person, many books written about him as well.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm grinning like an idiot here because I absolutely adore that accent. I think I said to you once, to me, it's like butter on a hot crumpet. It's just so smooth and melts. It's beautiful to listen to. So thank you. I was going to share that reading. I'm just so grateful you did, because there would have been another battle.
And even my Scottish vocabulary is not brilliant there, so I probably made one or two mistakes.
Well, I'm sure nobody will notice. Absolutely. But it is fascinating, isn't it? Because there is that element within our evidential mediumship. Now, I've experienced this a couple of times, and I'm always very mindful and very cagey if there's any precognitive behavior or things. Have you experienced this in your mediumship? I'm not talking fortune telling, just with me, it's just random things.
This is something growing up, because people ask about mediumship, and I always say to folk, quite honestly, that I grew up and I didn't see dead people. That didn't happen. But I used to get this feeling, and it was almost a kind of edgy feeling and not quite right. And then something would always happen in family or something just after, or there'd be a kind of spooky experience in the house, something like that. So that was very much evident, and sometimes I do still get that now, but not quite as frequent. So in mediumship, I think that kind of fortune, or not fortune telling, but seeing ahead, I think sometimes we do. And we do, those our loved ones in spirit may, I think very often come through when it is needed, when there's a time where we need that little bit of reassurance, that little bit of help. And perhaps they can see our pathway just a little bit clearer at times than we can. So I think through mediumship, that can be very useful as well.
Definitely. I did have an experience, and it was about a passing. Now, obviously, I'm not going to run around going, "Oh, they've shown me they're going to die." It was a purely personal experience. But I was then, I think, and the trouble is I can't prove or disprove this now, but I think I was in a better place that when that event happened, that I was able to step straight in with the support, with the and be able just to be there for those left behind, to comfort or let them rant and rave at me. It didn't matter. I was prepared. That's probably the best description. I was prepared. I wasn't reeling from my own shock. It was just very gently laid on me, and I'm like. And I did say to him, "Don't ever show me things like that ever again. No use to me whatsoever." Well, I proved myself wrong a few days later, because it was useful. But again, nothing to crow about. I would never have dreamed of saying to anybody, especially closely related, oh yeah, well, I saw this company, you know, I just think that's the most hideous thing that we can do.
Yeah.
But for our personal wherewithal, it was like, oh, okay, right. Yeah, I just need to be there and be available, which did happen.
And I often think as well that in mediumship, our guides and spirit kind of see our path ahead as well. So it's kind of just at times just putting our trust in them and just, do you know what? Going with the flow.
Exactly.
Whatever happens.
And do you know what? That is so pertinent at the moment. There's just been so much work going on about living in the moment, going with the flow. You know, if you're having to fight against what you're doing, maybe you want to think about that. Why are you trying to swim upstream when you can just go downstream with everybody else? I don't know. But yeah, that is very pertinent. But I did love the reference in there about the Brahan.
The brand seer, yeah.
Right, so yeah, I will get it right by 8 o'clock. That it was seen as a curse, which you touched upon there. Because there's that you can understand the fear as civilization started to grow and enmesh, and villages and towns were born, and then cities.
Yeah.
You know, in the good oldie days, if we go back to like the Salem witch trials, that's a really good example. The Salem witch trials, a lot of the bases of these witch trials were people had escaped this country, history repeating itself, I think, and starting anew in the new world. But of course, it was a very male, masculine-dominated society. The Council of Elders was all male. And then suddenly these, and mainly women, who were seers, healers, and whatever, were gaining this ground and popularity. And this is what introduced a lot of the witch trials, and this frenzy and paranoia built up. I do love the Monty Python take on the witch. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but that just encapsulates it so well. But it does show, you know, as civilization has grown, that where you would have a small village, and it would just be accepted that so-and-so down the road was a healer, and she could see things, she could talk to the vet, and it would be accepted. But it does seem as civilization started to stamp its mark on there, then that turned from being just a purely natural facet and a part of the culture to something quite different, because there is one chapter, Agnes Finney.
Oh, Agnes Finney. Now, Agnes Finney is quite a character here, and she's one that I often come back to as well here, because she was thought to be Scotland's busiest witch. And in fact, actually, it was quoted that whenever her name was mentioned, people would say that if there was ever a witch worthy of her neighbours' fears and accusations, it was Agnes Finney. Now, she goes back to the 17th century here, and she ran a small general store, but she was also a moneylender. And, you know, she was a Scot. She liked her debts paid promptly here. That's the way she was in those days. But it was the case that the story starts when she's walking up I assume, the Royal Mile, and a little boy starts calling her names. And she turns round, and it is said, or the boy says, that she uttered these words to him. And of course, the boy returns home, but within 24 hours, he loses the ability of his left side, so he cannot move. So this kind of ties in a little bit with Agnes and this curse a couple of days before. And then she has an argument with her neighbour, and this neighbour is a Beatrix Nisbet here. So she has an argument with her. No one knows what the argument was about, but Agnes is said to place a curse upon Beatrix. And a wee while later, Beatrix tries to speak, but she can't. She's lost her voice here. So this is the start of Agnes's fearsome reputation heading through Edinburgh. And then, of course, the other thing that happens here, she causes more upset. There's an old Ricky, which is Edinburgh, old Ricky fishwife called Janet here. So Agnes buys 2 herring from her, obviously, to have for dinner. But when she gets home, when she cooks the herring, she finds it's not fresh. So again, being a Scot, she's not happy. She takes it back. She wants a refund here, but Janet refused to give her the refund. So Agnes then shouted to Janet that she would never eat another thing in this world. And it was said that Janet died that very same day. So then there's other instances that happen here, and she's invited to a house to help to help a young boy who's ill. And you may wonder why, with her reputation, that the parents even let her in the door here. But again, it goes back to where magic is used to harm. Again, it is thought to heal. And perhaps, and probably, they were at their wits' end that, yeah, they want to try anything here. So Agnes goes into the room with the young boy, and the Buchanans, the parents, they go into another room and they seemingly kneel in prayer, etc. But as the Buchanans go back in, they find that there's this, it's almost a part of the young boy's skin has been eaten away. And they said it was like the flesh had been pulled away. So again, she now gets the blame for that here. She falls out with a local shoemaker and tells him that his business would go downhill, and it does. And when the shoemaker finally gives her an apology here, his business is back on the rise here. But I did say she was a moneylender, and there's Mrs. Simpson who she lent money to. And after 8 days, it was due to be repaid, and it wasn't. So Agnes gives her that extra little time, and again, she doesn't pay. And Agnes flies into a rage and says she will have a very sore heart indeed. And a few days later, Mrs. Simpson's husband died. So finally, after 28 years, the townsfolk had had enough. They present all their evidence to the authorities, which of course are all male. You know, we might as well factor into that here. Agnes is taken into custody, and at her trial, suddenly there's this evidence or whatever to say she had made a pact with the devil and was said to catch up with him on numerous occasions as well. So you can start to see the way this is going here. Many people give accounts of the wrongdoings caused by Agnes. And this is also where the facts come in, because on December the 11th, 1644, Agnes was actually found guilty of being, quote, in continual society and company of the devil. And she was sentenced to be hung outside Edinburgh Castle and then burnt at the stake. So that was her end.
Well, they made sure of that, didn't they?
Oh, yes. It's interesting because, you know, up here, and of course there was the public executions at the time, but another one that's also always fascinated me is Burke and Hare. And although I don't include them in the book, William Burke was sentenced to be hung, and he was. And he was hung to a crowd of 20,000 people in Edinburgh. They sold souvenirs on the day, postcards depicting the hanging of Burke. And Burke, of course, was known as the body snatchers. Him and Hare. Hare turned king's evidence. Hare gets off scot-free. Burke is hung. And then, after he's hung, they dissected the body. And there is little books and journals made out of the skin of William Burke. And then they placed the skeleton in Surgeons' Hall, where it hangs to this day. And interestingly, there are a few death masks of William Burke. And I remember many years ago in Inverary Castle, and we were there, and the person in charge brought out a box and said, "Oh, I've got something to show you." And out he came with this death mask. And I can now claim to have held the death mask of William Burke. My claim to fame there.
Wow. But again, sort of trying to view this through the lens of spiritualism and spirituality, we all accept that through sending out thoughts for healing, we have an effect.
Yeah.
Now, I've always said and always brought into the training, if you accept that this is so, then surely you really got to consider that the opposite is true as well.
Yeah.
You know, we are using a power. You know, I've got electricity here, lovely, keeping the lights on, enabling us to talk and everything like that. The same electricity can be used for a multitude of reasons which are not so well founded in the goodness side. So it does make me wonder, and I can understand the paranoia side, because when you were saying about all those people, what sprang to mind was the Me Too thing that we saw a few years back. That once it had become public and once, you know, it had been brought to the attention, then suddenly there's a multitude of people stepping forward saying, "Oh yeah, we did this, did that." Now, whether that was based in actual evidence or we tend to get, and sadly, we're seeing this at the moment on social media with a certain topic of discussion where people are just sort of now giving it a life of its own by bringing in positive and really negative comments about a certain subject. And those who know what I'm talking about, it doesn't need talking about anymore. But we do have this sort of like mass, almost like a mass hysteria, isn't it? There's just something there. It creates an energy. We understand energy is energy and we can manipulate that. But when you have a situation, how many Burkes hanging? 20,000?
20,000 turned out to see that spectacle. I mean, a public hanging could bring the crowds out in Edinburgh and beyond as well. But it was a good day out.
Fair enough.
It was in those days for people. And there's even a memorial to the witches on the Esplanade, although accused of witchcraft on the Esplanade at Edinburgh Castle as well. So we take that. There was the executions there, executions at the Market Cross, executions at the Grass Market, Shrub Hill and Leith Walk, another place as well. It was that sign of the times where if you didn't like your neighbour, you just had to give a little accusation or two, and that was almost enough to sow the seed of doubt in people's minds. And suddenly that person was accused of witchcraft. And there are some, really sad tales as well, because on the west side of Edinburgh, where I am, Christorfan, there was a lady who was jailed in the bell tower of the old parish church, accused of witchcraft. And rather than face trial, she hung herself on the bell rope. There's a wee tale to brighten up a Saturday night.
Yeah. I know. We need social media. We do it on. Exactly. We now do trial by social media, trial by Facebook. There's always so popular.
On the other hand, there was a Bessie Miller, and she was in Orkney, and the fishermen would go to her because, of course, the seas, you know, all the, in those times, the women folk that would be there to gut the fish that's brought back, etc., they were always, you know, in fear that their husbands and their sons were not going to make it back. So fishermen in Orkney would actually visit an old woman called Bessie Miller, and she would sell wins for 6p. And for those sailors who parted with their 6p, she would boil the kettle and give her prayers for the desired winds that they wished. Not quite sure why she boiled the kettle. Maybe they got a little cup of tea as well, but she certainly said to give them the winds, the favourable winds for their boats.
I was going to mention the wonderful Bessie, but I was working out how do I introduce that this lady used to sell a win for 6p. So I was like, I can't say it that way. There's got to be a better way of saying this.
There are, as stories get embellished, of course, there's another couple of versions, but I understand it's the right version. But they all have those grains of truth. And that's the great thing about them. You know, it's, you take them right back and you find they were people. There were people that lived our history.
Yeah. We go over, we've got a few people in the room. The lovely Reverend Ashley, going back to when we were talking about Salem. It was femicide, but there are countless men who were murdered too. And she also asked a very intriguing question here. And she's saying, Ewan, have you ever been involved in the seeking of justice for the Scottish Witches campaign?
We did, and this goes back many years, where we actually asked for a pardon for Helen Duncan, who was the last person in Scotland to be accused of witchcraft. We actually took it to the Scottish Parliament, but they really weren't that interested, which was, well, I guess that was their view. But that was something that we looked at. And then I know there's been ongoing stuff done, not by myself, but another group, about trying to get that one memorial for all those accused of witchcraft. So I'm not quite sure how that's going, but I believe that's certainly an operation here.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Ashley. That was a lovely thing to bring in. Excuse me, I'm so sorry. We're talking about witches, and my cat's got very active now. Just giving all my secrets away. You've just recently had the wonderful Edinburgh Festival, and you were doing talks during there. Were these at the Arthur Conan Doyle Centre?
These were at the Arthur Conan Doyle Centre during the festival. And the first year I did that, I had a talk called Tales of the Condemned, was about all those accused of witchcraft, but bringing the people to light, bringing their story, you know, because there were people that lived, and to try and show that. And the same this time as well, it was Tales of Haunted Edinburgh, but again, it was bringing the people into those to show that they did live. And all these stories have fact. They're all rooted in the fact. And for instance, there are a number related to Edinburgh Castle here, the Royal Mile, the Grass Market. But one of the stories that I have always had an interest in, and we go to Greyfriars Kirkyard. Now, this is a place where during day, everybody passes it, no problem at all here. And of course, it's just behind the wee statue of Greyfriars Bobby, that lovely wee dog. And everybody
shiny
nose, and it's all the it's getting a wee bit tarnished now and everything. I mean, it's a lovely story, but the cemetery behind it really has a number of dark and actually spine-chilling tales. You'll walk by it by day, but you won't really go into it at night. And in there sits a round building, Black Mausoleum, and that became the scene of Edinburgh's most notorious poltergeist. And the story really begins in 1670s here, when we have Lord Advocate, one Sir George Mackenzie. And he was appointed by the king to rebel against the Presbyterian Covenanters. And that was due to their failure to accept state-approved religion and swear loyalty to the king. So to take that story on a bit, they round up several thousand Presbyterian Covenanter rebels, and they were imprisoned by Sir George Mackenzie in a small section, and it's a very small section of Greyfriars Kirkyard, and it became known as the Covenanters' Prison. Now, of course, Scotland, Edinburgh, is not known for its warm winters, I have to say. So you can imagine with no cover,
it's not very summers either.
You're exposed to the elements here. And as well, some were deported, there was torture, starvation, beheadings, all at the hands of Lord Advocate Sir George Mackenzie. And it was even said, actually, the private business of persecution that he carried out on behalf of the king was actually so well hidden that even his wife never saw that side of him. Because this was a man that was at the top of Edinburgh society here. But that happened, and George Mackenzie, who became known as Bloody Mackenzie, when he died, he was placed in the Black Mausoleum. And it's only literally yards away from the Covenanters' prison. You can walk it in 20 seconds. And 300 years kind of passed, perhaps in a kind of uneasy peace. But all that ended, and again, the facts are there. You can look at the newspapers of the time and all the stories in 1998, because it's thought that a homeless man, and probably wanting shelter from the rain, managed to get into the Mackenzie Mausoleum. 300 years have passed. The floor, the wooden floor, is not quite what it used to be, and there are 2 levels underneath. So he fell through it. Now, he must have got quite a shock when he saw the casket of Bloody Mackenzie, or George Mackenzie, but he must have, for whatever reason, pried the casket open, because that's how it was found. This is when the story really starts, because the next day, there's a passerby who looks into the iron gates, and in her own words, she says she was blasted back off its steps by a cold force. A while later, there's a woman found near the tomb's entrance, unconscious. Her neck is covered with bruises. And she said it's as if someone had tried to choke the life from her. So this starts the story. The ghost of George Mackenzie has been awakened. And there have been over 500 ghostly attacks. 500. And that has been the case, and they still exist to this day. And when we did Edinburgh Ghost Fest many years ago, we had a press night, and we went to, and I do have to add in, we went to Mary King's Close, Greyfriars Kirkyard, the vaults. But I remember the following day getting up, went to take a shower, and I just saw these bruises, these fingerprint bruises on my chest. I wish I'd taken a picture, but I think I was a little bit in shock at the time. Because I thought, what's that? And all I can put it down to is that's my experience at the Black Mausoleum.
Wow.
And there's still reports to this day here as well of the different events that happen there. So it was that one episode in 1998 that seems to have awakened the ghost of George Mackenzie.
That is absolute. I'm up there in November, and guess what?
You need to visit. I'm happy to come with you, but I don't go in at night. It's too scary.
Oh no!
Oh no, too scary. But you know, I did say earlier as well. There's a lovely little story, which, well, not a lovely little story actually, but to me, it's a nice little story, a wee story. A wee story, and I wish I could find the fact in this, but it's the one that I have to say at the moment I can only put it down to legend. But of course, we have Edinburgh Castle, and Edinburgh Castle, going back in the days, we had the city walls, and the whole of Edinburgh was crammed into the city wall. You go down the Royal Mile, you come to the World Ends pub. That's where Edinburgh ended at that time. So you could imagine as it becomes overcrowded and overcrowded that we then built up. We had some of the first world's skyscrapers, 16, 17 stories high here. But of course, Edinburgh Castle, it's a military garrison protected by the city walls. But what if it was sieged? What do you do? How do you escape? And it was always rumoured that there are various tunnels. And the more you look into it, you realise that the possibility is that they're there. There are some tunnels in the Royal Mile. There's a tunnel that goes down Leith Walk. There's an old railway tunnel that actually goes through Calton Hill here. So you start to realise, well, that would be an ideal means for escape if they had to get out. The story starts when some of Edinburgh's town people find this entrance at the castle to a tunnel. Now, we are a curious lot, and when we find an entrance to a tunnel, we have to find out where that tunnel goes to, or else it's just going to annoy us and annoy us. But the entrance to the tunnel is very small. You cannot fit an adult down it. What's the next best thing? We sent them up to clean. We sent them up chimneys to sweep the chimneys.
A volunteer child.
So I don't know if they were volunteered or not, but they found a child. So the next thing is that, okay, how do we know what part of the tunnel he's in? What's the loudest musical instrument known to mankind? The bagpipes.
The bagpipe. Oh, okay. That was too obvious. That's why I didn't go.
If we send this child down with bagpipes, we'll hear him. And they certainly did. They could hear him above the cobbles of the Royal Mile. And they heard this little child going down the tunnel until the bagpipes stopped. So they had to find, I assume, another child to go down and try and find out what happened. The other child does make it back up, but then says he could not find any sight of the young boy with the bagpipes. He has simply disappeared. And the story is that the young boy was never seen again. But in the quieter nights at the Royal Mile, and there are not many of them, it's said that sometimes you can just hear the sound of bagpipes just from underneath the cobbles on the Royal Mile.
That's got me on so many levels. People who do potholing and things like that, I just simply do not understand. The thought of going into a very narrow, confined space underground is just so abhorrent to me. But to send, we have a volunteer, re the Black Mausoleum. Elspeth is saying she's not coming with us to the Black Mausoleum, but Elspeth may volunteer. How are you with bagpipes, Elspeth?
But we do have, we have, like, for instance, the vaults in Mary King's Close, and not many people know that underneath the camera obscura next to the castle, which is that it's the camera optics and everything. It's like almost like a lighthouse type building. But underneath that is the remains of old Ramsay's Close. And it's still got some of the rooms and buildings and everything. It's all filled with like janitorial stuff and different things. But it does make you wonder what is underground.
Yeah, true. Absolutely. And that does make perfect sense. Here in Poole was the original town. Bournemouth was nothing, it was moorland. And our biggest trade was actually smuggling. And all our ancestors must have been moles, because there's tunnels found all these years later, miles and miles and miles of them. And of course, a lot of the houses built would have cellars, so they would tunnel between cellars to keep moving the contraband around to escape the customs and excise. We've got a volunteer.
Volunteer. And actually, another one, and I think this kind of is for me, there's a connection, and I like the connection. It's like, the Lady of Lores, I've gone to visit the village. I love Perthshire, always have done, and been there a lot. The Mackenzie Mausoleum, the fact that experience happened. But there's the Festival Theatre in Edinburgh. Lovely building, but it wasn't always called that. It was the Empire Theatre until it burnt down. And then it became, I think, the Festival Theatre then, or whatever. But my mother's great-grandfather was stage door manager. And he used to get my mother all the autographs. So we have the autographs of all the old great stars like Laurel and Hardy. We have Diana Dors, Alistair Sims, that type of thing, all from there. But the interesting bit is that there was an illusionist of the time. Of the earliest 20th century, he was the great Lafayette. And he was one of the most celebrated illusionists of the 20th century. But there were others competing. There were other illusionists trying to get a better act than him. So he had to make his acts more elaborate each time. Now, he was quite a character. He was extravagant and lavish. And if you could imagine Liberace on speed, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And he was the highest paid entertainer at the theatre of the time. And he worked with a wee dog he had called Beauty, Edinburgh's second most famous but not well-known dog, who's buried in one of Edinburgh's cemeteries. And the dog was called Beauty, and he died just a few days before the great Lafayette. But in 1911, the great Lafayette visits the Edinburgh Festival Theatre. I remember he's so famous that the crowds went to see him. But he was determined to perform his most ambitious production to date. And after he performed his finale, The Lion's Bride, he would swap places live on stage with a real life lion. So he would have obviously gone through a trapdoor or whatever, and however the lion appeared, but that's how he was going to swap places. But there was a lamp that fell down and it set the building on fire, and including the great Lafayette himself. And he was later found under the trapdoor in the basement. The lion perished as well. And there's some really rare footage of the after effect on, I think, YouTube as well. His funeral, again, brought out the thousands of people in Edinburgh to witness as he was so famous. But the crux of the story is that people have claimed to have seen him in the Festival Theatre to this day. And what they see, remember I did say it was like a Liberace on speed. They sometimes see the glint of diamond rings in the dark. And it's also been reported that it's been a piercing lion's roar in the empty auditorium on occasion as well. So another one that I find fascinating.
Wow, that's totally enthralled here. But there's always a very, very strong link, isn't there, between the theatre, the thespians, etc., and you know, a lot of superstition, a lot of folklore. I wonder if in that creativity, in that where the mind is open, when we're talking about mediumship, we're not just talking about, you know, communicating and passing on messages. We're looking for the inspiration. And I do wonder if in our actors circle, that is either a talent that is learned or natural, to start picking up that inspiration from the other world, because of the amount of acceptance about it. It's never questioned by the others, and I find that intriguing.
And we talk about that superstitious lot. Where did break a leg come from? The faith. But one of the things I was thinking there about that openness and that ability, and it's great if people have grown up perhaps in that world where maybe parents and everything have been actors, etc. But I always think, and I could be wrong here, but when we start growing up, the whole idea from our parents, in a good way, you know, they're just trying to protect us, is that we're protected from that word death. It's just not talked about. And everything since the birth of the NHS is now very clinical. More times than not, we will die in a hospital. We won't die at home and with our loved ones, and there's the whole everything that happens afterwards. Because I remember my mother always talking about my grandmother being in the box, she called it, in the parlour.
Yeah.
Going back.
Yeah.
That's the way it was. She also said they dared each other to go in. It wasn't shied away from. Now it very often is. And it's like if you go to see a relative whose husband or wife has passed away, and I remember this on occasion, and being told, don't talk about your uncle. Don't mention your uncle. You'll only upset her. And then everything's shied away from, and everything's whispered, and it's something that becomes to be very fearful of. Something that's going to happen to every single one of us on the planet. Like it or lump it. That's the way it's going to go. So is it something that in that being scared that we just don't go into that kind of world? We're not allowed to.
Yeah.
That maybe sounds wrong, but I think it's that refinding it in some way.
Okay.
So,
sorry.
So I think that's something I found as well. But I have to say, within that, there was a freedom for me to choose what I wanted to choose. You know, I used to go to Sunday school until one day I refused to go completely. I had too many questions. I don't think the Sunday school teacher liked it. My one that I came out with that she couldn't answer, I remember saying, so if there's a God, who created God? There must be an end to the universe. There's got to be. But when you get to that end, and if you were to chisel through, what's at the other side? I was a very problematic child.
Yes, I'm beginning to get that now.
But in all seriousness, there was things that just didn't make sense to me. And I guess at the end of the day, spiritualism did, because that answers so many of the questions of things that were happening with me. It was that freedom within it as well. And it took a long while to find, but it's certainly been interesting, rewarding, and sometimes tiring route as well, I have to say.
Yeah. And sometimes
it's a funny old world.
Oh, hilarious at times. Sometimes when we're going through things, we know there's a reason. We just haven't got the faintest idea what it is and wish we weren't there. But We can go through the reasoning with it. It's absolutely fascinating. Your knowledge is just astounding.
But I've always loved, for instance, the history of Edinburgh, and I always loved things like the Victorian times and the way that we used to live. And there was a great program on TV. There was a couple of series, but it was called A House Through Time.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember the guy's name. He was a really great presenter, and I've actually got the book still to read. But there was even one of the houses where spiritualism was practiced. They had seances in the house as well, and it just went straight back from the first owners right up to date. And there's something really fascinating about that.
Very true. Very true. There's wonderful old film, Days of Our Lives, that follows the family in London through all the changes and the war years and everything. And it really is such a wonderful old film, so evocative of the era. But there is a segment in there where she's going to the Temple of the Enhanced Vibration. And that was obviously the influence of spiritualism at that time was so prevalent that they actually built that into the film. And I thought that was fascinating as well.
Yeah. It just reminds me there because going back, there was one of the most famous ghost pictures. And it's where you see almost like a shrouded woman on the staircase. And it's one of the most famous pictures. And the Daily Star at the time, they covered it. And the editor asked for people to send their stories in from all walks of life, all walks at the time. And we've got to remember at that time, it was very much a class society. It really was. So the letters came in from all classes, and there was about 4,000 letters that came in here. And many talked about the visions that we're talking about as well. And I always remember one story was a woman who took her kids to, I think it was Babacom. I'm sure it was. I'd have to relook at the story. But she takes them out of London, and you think that would be the best place to leave it being bombed in the war. So she takes the kids there. But over time, she has this growing unease. And it's like a voice keeps saying to her, go back to London, go back to London. And she's probably thinking, that's the most dangerous place in Britain for me to go to at this time. But the voice becomes overwhelming. And she listens to it, and she heads back to London with her kids. And a wee while later, she gets a letter from one of the neighbours and I think, as I say, I think it was Babacom, but she gets a letter from one of the neighbours, and it says, thank God you returned to London, because a day later, the bomb dropped here and your house was destroyed.
Wow. Yeah.
And there's something there again, you know, when something calls out. And that takes me, I think, into something that we often talk about in mediumship and the psychic, is where, you know, growing up and again taught into us, it's all very intellectual. We use the mind. Yep. Our mind makes decisions, and our mind will make the right and will make the wrong decision here, but it's the mind. But there's something in here that, whether you call it that intuition, the spirit, the soul, or whatever, but it tells us, it kind of tells us the answer. And I think that's it.
Yeah.
Even for her, it was this. And eventually the head that was saying, London's dangerous, don't go back there. She stopped listening to there and listened to in here. And that actually saved her life.
Yeah. That's fascinating. Absolutely. And again, you know, all through our history, there are, the thing is, though, we when we act upon these things, sometimes what we have avoided is not visible.
Mm-hmm.
I always say one of my favorite films is Sliding Doors, because I love that concept. You know, one day you get on the train, one day you don't get on the train.
Mm-hmm.
But each story is separate, and each story would not have been known had that connection not been made. So sometimes we do things and we're left wondering and just going, why did I do that? Why on earth am I doing that? I always think we should just be grateful that we did do it, because we don't know. We don't know what could have happened. We don't know what turn of events. We don't know the implications, the effects, or whatever.
And I remember once saying as well, it's like the threads of life. What one do we pick? And we'll never know if we've chosen the right one or the wrong one, or if we truly picked it, or have we been directed to pick it. That's what makes life so interesting, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is one of the wonderful things in Spirit, that we haven't got these preconceived boundaries. You know, like a lot of the orthodox, you can do this, you can't do that. This is what they say, and don't do that. You know, spiritualism, very active and energetic. The word movement, sadly, the word movement is not being exercised to the full extent. But I feel as spiritualists, we have that duty to keep the movement of it going. Yeah. Not change for change's sake, but just to keep reviewing. A lot of our practices, they revolve back to like the 1920s and 1930s. Well, in business, we used to do a exercise once a month where we would take certain tasks and look at it totally independent of everything else and just go, is that fit for purpose? Does that suit today's business needs?
I'm just thinking, you're not old enough to remember the 1920s, 30s, were you?
No, I'm not.
Used to do that in the 1920s, 30s in the church. I was like,
there's a wonderful thing. We do have a huge resource of records and accounts. But as I say, you know, we do have that ability, and especially and not to leave the other world out for that inspiration with things.
And there's a lot of scope as well in what is happening, is that the way science is going as well. It's like, I always remember there was a brilliant book by, I think it was Billy Roberts and Kieran O'Keefe. And they, in the introduction, mention that coming out into both sides just coming out into no man's land and having a little play about with the ball.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a really great description. I've never forgotten that, actually.
Yeah, that is a good description. The one thing, though, I've had a example of not too long ago, was when spiritualism is presented by a non-spiritualist, it can become very uncomfortable. And it can evoke, I can see where people jump up and down when you talk about scientists coming in and things like that. But it's another view of what we do. And all right, we are naturally protective. We are naturally, you know, we are spiritualists and this is our world. So when something comes along that looks as us, you know, from an external lens, it can be quite uncomfortable, but it's there. And it's being seen. And we've got to acknowledge that as part of our overall energy. You know, not everybody who comes into a service, into a dem, watches online, whatever, has got any inkling knowledge or understanding, and possibly not even much interest. You know, we've all seen it, haven't we? The missus has sat there and the old man sat there, been dragged along.
Yeah, it's been dragged along.
Yeah. Yeah, come in with.
And he usually gets a message as well.
Oh, every time. But yeah, you know, I couldn't be anything else other than a spiritualist. It is in my fibre. Whether I'm good one or bad one, history will tell, and that's fine. But again, everybody's viewpoints on it.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we got to remember with our practices, our religion, our philosophy, whatever you want to call it, people outside are going to look in and look at it differently to us. And it's not, all right, we do get the detractors. We do get, sometimes when I'm advertising, if I stray off of the spiritual pages and into the public domain, you do get a fair proportion of like idiots putting stupid comments on, just go away. But we do see people looking in, they come out with comment, and do you know what? Some of these comments that they bring in are really interesting because they are looking at it totally differently. They are, they're seeing it in a different light, and you just think, wow, I've never thought of that aspect. Thank you.
Someone asked the other week about why can't we see how our own lives will progress? And I thought that was quite interesting in a way. And I remember thinking, well, it's going to progress that one day I'll be over there and then I'm going to have an argument with them because I ain't coming back. That's it. I'm done. If there's that theory of reincarnation over many times, I must be done and dusted by now.
Yeah.
That's it. But it took me back. I remember something that happened many years ago, and I was actually going to the Conan Doyle Centre to do a few readings. I parked the car, got out the car, walked along the street, and I still don't know what happened. They think it was something happened to blood pressure or something, but whatever it was, I'd fainted or passed out or whatever, and I broke my ankle. So obviously I was taken into hospital, spent a week in hospital, operation and everything. But the funny thing is, the two folk that I was going to do a reading for never came back. And I remember after it, a few comments saying, well, you never saw that coming, did you? So you can't be that good.
Yeah.
You never saw that coming. And I remember thinking, well, actually, they've got a point.
The standing joke. There's a pub locally to us, and they have one of these firms come in, and they do readings nights there. And some local wag, and I howled when I saw it on the bus. They got the big sign up advertising it, and somebody just stuck underneath, cancelled due to unforeseen circumstances. I just found that absolutely hilarious. I didn't get up in arms.
And there's a cartoon that was going around on Facebook of the one lone passenger on the plane, on the airplane, where the hostess says, you can take whatever seat you want because our large contingent of psychic travellers have cancelled at the last minute.
But again, when we were talking earlier and going back into the fact of things, there is actual irrefutable evidence that, airlines now have this hideous practice of they've got 100 seats, so they book 102 because 2 people cancel, yada, yada. But they work on a certain percentage of dropouts on flights. And I think it's something like they run at 2-3% of dropouts for whatever reason. People don't make it, yada, yada. However, when there's been big air crashes, and 9/11, this really came out because they had all those planes, the dropout rate suddenly went down to 8, 9, and 10%.
Yeah.
And the same with people traveling into the city. I mean, it's awful, awful, awful time. But there were so many people who were due to be there, and the car wouldn't start. They lost their keys. That was one lady's experience. Lost their keys, found them the next day. Wow, that's a bit.
Yeah. And I suppose you could argue it from the others, the other way, that with that number of people, what would the likelihood be and all that. But it's still fascinating. It's like when you hear the stories of the tsunamis and things, and again, very, very tragic. But in a lot of these cases, all the birds and even wildlife and things, they left.
Yeah.
How did they know?
Yeah.
That takes me back to another question as I had a child. how do elephants know where to go to die?
Yeah.
That, and although I say that in a kind of funny way, because I remember that question, I must have seen something on TV or something. What is it? What's that? Because how could it just be almost like evolution, or there's something there? But they know.
To me, it's that interconnectedness. And funny you should mention elephants, because in Sri Lanka, where they have the elephant orphanage, the day before, so I think that would have been Christmas Day, all the elephants just pack their trunks. Sorry, I had to get that in. They all just packed up and moved up the hills. And then less than 24 hours later, again, it shows this interconnectedness of all things, of life. You know, that one thread of life runs through everything, including us.
Yeah.
And it's just having that ability to shut this up.
And that's as mediums and those that are, you know, I was going to say practicing their mediumship. I don't know if that's the right or wrong word, but always comes in, is it me?
Yeah.
Or is it them? And I always come out with one answer. And I just remember it was an experience that happened many, many years ago, because it was a mistake. It was a mistake I almost made, actually, in allowing the mind to come into my mediumship. Because I remember connecting with a lovely young lad who had gone to spirit, and I was given the reading to his mum, and it was from a public platform. And I remember our son showing me his grave, but it was littered with Coca-Cola cans. And the mind came straight in and said, you cannot tell his mum that her son's grave has a whole lot of Coca-Cola cans on it. Something kept saying, no, you have to say that. And I put my trust in them and said, okay, that's fine. I said to her. And for her, that was that bit of proof, because her son loved Coca-Cola. And when anyone visited the grave, they would take a can of Coca-Cola and put it at his grave. And it was just, it was that bit that I remember thinking, right, I have to always show respect, as we do, but just put my faith in them, just put my trust in them. Yeah. And again, it's that going with the flow. So that's what I always use a kind of an example to folk, because the mind, in all manner of ways, it's a very powerful instrument, that mind, too powerful at times.
Incredibly, and it's up to us to learn ways to make that a usable energy rather than a destructive or something, you know, a barrier to things. Ewan, this has been absolutely wonderful.
It's been a very quick hour and a bit. It's kind of flown by us.
Doesn't matter. It's been really, really interesting. Again, you know, the way your delivery is just absolutely superb and wonderful.
But I think it's a subject that, you know, there are so many parts of it: spiritualism, mediumship, and paranormal, and everything. I think it's one we could talk to for years to come and not stop. There's so many bits to it.
Most definitely. You know, what is a ghost? That's got to be a show all on its own.
Yep. And also, just coming, we are actually together again in the next few weeks.
We are.
I can't remember what date. Online mediumship at the Conan Doyle Centre, which is currently advertised on the website, I think, or the Conan Doyle Centre website.
Yeah, it's the 26th of October.
And after that, you are then coming up to do a workshop at the Conan Doyle Centre. And we will be visiting Greyfriars Kirkyard in the dead of night by the sulphur moon. Yeah.
With Elspeth leading the way with the torch.
Actually, it might go during the day. It's a nice wee pub. There's a Greyfriars pub next to it as well. That's a lovely little place. Haunted.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I've been known to do pubs.
Me too.
Ewan, it's been absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much. So much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. That's absolutely wonderful. The lovely Lee Chu. Then I hope she'll be able to sleep tonight.
Actually, I stay in, and although the house is fairly modern, I'm not quite sure what was on the land beforehand, but even this house has its resident ghost or two.
Yeah, which has a resident spider, doesn't it? Ewan.
Sorry?
Has a resident spider as well.
I'm not too sure. Oh, the resident spy. Oh, yes. Yeah, there's a small kind of outbuilding at the back, and I went to clean it out. And I have to say, I think you'd have heard the scream a mile away, because I'm not good with spiders and snakes and things.
Yeah.
But the closest ever came to it was a trek where we went in Jordan through to Petra. And I don't like heights and I don't like snakes. And guess what I encountered on one day alone? Two of these, the heights and the snakes. And I just cried. Someone said, "Are you okay?" And I just burst out in tears. But the spider, this was, I mean, it must have been
at least
by about that.
Yeah.
And it was at the corner. And I honestly swear this thing turned round and looked at me. It was like Arachnophobia, the film.
Yeah.
And there was nothing I could do. I couldn't go near it. I could do nothing.
Then turn your back on it.
And I had to just wait for it to go. I don't know where it is now. And I do hope, I do in a way hope it's maybe in spider heaven. I know that sounds good, but
anyway. Ewan, it's been absolute delight. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. Just a little note, tomorrow's service will not be available online. That's at the wish of the demonstrator, and that's absolutely fine. The thought of the camera for some people is a little bit terrifying, and I'm not going to make our demonstrators uncomfortable. So you won't be seeing us tomorrow online, but we will be back Sunday week with a totally different type of service. We're doing a talking head service where Sarah Deverell is the invited demonstrator, and we'll be in conversation. And it's more about talking with a few Q&As. There may be some evidential mediumship in there, but just slight switch every now and then. The divine services are beautiful. Every now and then, we just like to have a little switch, something a bit different. So that's Sunday week, and that will be available online. Next Saturday, we have Chris Jacobs is our guest on the Lyceum evening. In the meantime, Ewan, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, and lovely comments coming in. Fascinating. You really can hold an audience. It's such a wonderful gift you have there.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, it's been beautiful. So, stop waffling, Lawrence. Everybody, have a wonderful, wonderful night. God bless, and we'll see you again all soon.
Thank you.